62 years old, a dodgy left hip, and 28 years working the land out at Murrindindi. And somehow, the moment my own daughter-in-law smiled at me across the breakfast table that Sunday morning was the moment I should have known something was already broken beyond fixing. But I didn't know. None of us ever do, until the ground gives way beneath us. Welcome back to American Home Voices. Get yourself a cuppa, find a comfortable chair, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose differently. Drop a comment below and make sure you subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. My name is Graham Whitfield, retired agricultural consultant, Yea, Victoria. 28 years advising farming families across the Yea Valley and up into the high country on soil management, water rights, fencing disputes, and the particular kind of stubbornness that gets bred into a man when his livelihood depends on weather he cannot control. I know land. I know what it means to people. I know what it makes people do. The irony of not seeing what the land beneath my own feet was doing to my own family is something I will carry for the rest of my life. My wife is Patricia Whitfield, 60 years old. Former secondary school teacher, English and history, 31 years in the classroom at Yea High before she retired early to look after her mother. She grows dahlias. She bakes sponge cake with a lightness that should be scientifically impossible. She keeps a reading journal going back to 1987, and she has never, in 33 years of marriage, raised her voice in anger. Not once. I thought I knew her completely. I did not know her at all. Our son is Callum Whitfield, 33 years old, project manager with a civil construction firm in Melbourne. Got my stubbornness and his mother's ability to make you feel like everything is completely fine when it absolutely is not. Dangerous combination. 3 years ago, he brought home a woman named Sophie Brennan, graphic designer, sharp wit, easy laugh. The kind of person who remembers your coffee order after meeting you once. She made Callum settle in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. We loved Sophie, or the woman we believed was Sophie. Sunday, March the 8th, 7:42 in the morning. The property at Whitfield Road, we've always called it the home block, 43 acres that my father purchased in 1968, when this whole valley was considered remote and slightly eccentric, was cool, and still, in that particular way, the high country gets before the autumn heat arrives. I had my old Akubra, my thermos, the border collie Ned at my heels, and absolutely no warning about what the next 48 hours would look like. We were walking the back fence line, a Sunday tradition Patricia and I had kept since the kids left home. 4 kilometers along the boundary. Check the posts, look at the creek, argue pleasantly about nothing that matters. Callum and Sophie had driven up the night before. First visit in 3 months. I had noticed they seemed distracted at dinner, but attributed it to Melbourne living, work pressure, the general brittleness that comes from too much screen time and not enough open sky. Sophie asked to join us on the walk. That was new. She'd always been a late riser, claimed she was allergic to mornings in a joking way that always got a laugh. But that Sunday she was dressed and ready before Patricia had finished her first cup of tea. Callum said he'd catch up. Needed to make a work call. On a Sunday. I noticed it. Filed it. Kept moving. Here's what you need to understand about our land before any of this makes sense. The home block at Whitfield Road has been in the Whitfield name since 1968. My father, Roy Whitfield, bought it from a man named Douglas Fenwick, retired sawmill operator, 4 children, mounting debts for $3,800. 43 acres of mixed grazing country, good creek access, a stand of old-growth messmate on the northern slope, and a timber cottage that has been added to, knocked around, and loved continuously for over 50 years. I grew up there. Patricia and I raised Callum and his younger sister Meredith there. The land has never been worth much in the conventional sense, until 14 months ago, when it suddenly was. A letter arrived from Cornerstone Land Solutions, a company registered in Brisbane, about what they called development partnership opportunities on rural properties in the Yea Valley corridor. I read the first paragraph, assumed it was the kind of thing that gets sent to every rural landowner every few years, put it on the kitchen bench, and forgot about it. I did not know, could not have known that that letter was the reason Sophie Brennan had agreed to come for a Sunday morning walk along a fence line in March. The incident happened at the back corner of the property. The land drops away sharply there where the old creek bank has eroded over decades. A 3-meter drop into a rocky, dry channel, steep enough to be genuinely dangerous. The kind of place I'd told Callum 100 times to be careful around as a boy. I was ahead of Patricia, checking a post that had been leaning since winter. Sophie was behind Patricia. I heard Patricia make a sound, not a scream, more a sharp intake of breath. The sound of surprise before pain arrives, and then I heard her fall. I turned and lunged without thinking, and something connected with my left shoulder. Then there was the bank edge, and then there wasn't. I hit the dry creek bed 4 seconds later. Patricia had landed at the base of the bank, partially cushioned by the long grass at the bottom. I came down harder, left side into the rocky channel bed, hip screaming. 3 ribs that I would later learn were cracked. Left wrist bent at an angle that told me everything I needed to know before I even tried to move it. Patricia. My voice came out wrong. Too thin for the open air. Over here. She was against the bank, sitting up, breathing. A cut above her left eyebrow bleeding freely down her face. Right knee turned out in a way that worried me. But she was upright, and she was looking at me with absolute clarity. Above us, footsteps. Sophie's voice. "Oh God! They've gone over!" And then silence. 1 second. 2. Then almost too quiet to hear Callum's voice from further back. He'd appeared from somewhere. Are they and Sophie cutting straight across him, sharp and low? We need to get to the car. We need to call someone from the road. Now. Callum. Not I'll call 000. Not can you hear me, Graham? Not a single word. Directed down into that creek bed. We need to go now. I opened my mouth and Patricia's hand found my arm. Grip like a vice for someone with a bleeding head wound. Don't. Barely a breath. Don't make a sound. Graham. Patricia. Her eyes were completely steady. Something in them I'd never seen in 33 years. Not fear. The opposite of fear. Listen to me. Pretend we're not conscious. I need you to trust me, right now. Above us, 2 sets of footsteps moving away. Getting quieter. The sound of the back paddock gate. Gone. I lay in that dry creek bed for what felt like the length of a season, listening to Ned whimpering somewhere above us. The dog had stopped at the bank edge, didn't come over, bless him, and the sound of my own blood moving in my ears. Then Patricia made a sound I had never heard from her in 33 years of marriage. Something between exhaustion and relief, like a person who has been holding their breath so long they'd forgotten breathing was an option. There's something I have to tell you, she said. I've been waiting for the right moment for a long time, and I don't think I'm going to get a better one than this. Tell me, the woman with Callum. She paused. I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. I'm lying in a dry creek bed with broken ribs. I've got nowhere to be. The real Sophie Brennan, she said, lives in Fremantle. She's 31. She works for an architecture firm, and she has never met our son. I found her on LinkedIn 14 months ago when something didn't add up. I couldn't speak. The Sophie who came to our dinner table, the Sophie Callum brought home, she's not Sophie Brennan. I don't know her real name. I don't know exactly who sent her, but I know what she was looking for. Patricia shifted, winced, because I'm the one who hid what she needed to find. Hid what? She looked at me with an expression that contained 33 years and something she'd been carrying alone inside all of them. Documents. Under the cottage floor, in your father's old tin deed box. Original survey records. A statutory declaration. Proof that when your father bought this land from Douglas Fenwick, 22 acres of it, the northern slope, the messmate stand, the upper creek access didn't legally belong to Douglas at all. Somewhere above us, a car engine started. I kept my voice as level as I could manage with 3 cracked ribs. Patricia! What documents? Douglas Fenwick had a younger brother. Raymond had received those 22 acres as a direct bequest from their father's estate in 1961, separate title, witnessed and registered in Mansfield. Douglas knew about it. When the debts got bad enough, he sold the whole 43 acres to your father anyway. Forged Raymond's signature on the transfer. How do you know this? Raymond Fenwick came to the school in 1991. She said it quietly. I was on yard duty. He was 64 years old and he'd been trying to get someone to listen for 20 years. He had the original bequest documentation. He had a statutory declaration from the estate solicitor. He had nothing else. No money, no family support. Solicitors wouldn't take a case with no funding. He didn't know what to do with the paperwork anymore. He said he trusted teachers. I stared at the sky above the creek bank. I was 28. I thought I was helping him preserve something that might still matter. I took the documents home, put them in your father's deed box under the cottage floor, and told myself I'd work out the right thing to do. Raymond died the following winter. No estate, no heirs, no one else who knew. Then we had Callum. Then Meredith. Then 30 years passed the way 30 years does when you're busy living inside them. Then Cornerstone sent that letter. I closed my eyes. And then Callum started asking questions. Patricia's silence was its own kind of answer. And then Sophie arrived, getting 2 injured people up a 3-meter eroded creek bank with 1 functional wrist between us, a cracked hip, and ribs that had opinions about every single movement. Took 41 minutes, and a vocabulary of profanity that genuinely startled Ned when he finally found a way down to us and back up again. At the 20-minute mark, "You're not using your left arm at all," Patricia's voice. Informative, slightly schoolteacher. "I'm a consultant," I said. "I consult with my whole body simultaneously." She almost laughed, and then made the face that meant something hurt badly and was being declined, comment on indefinitely. At the farm gate, Callum's hire car was gone. My old Land Cruiser was there. On the driver's side mirror, held with a cable tie, was a manila envelope. Inside, a contract of sale, Whitfield Road property, transferring from Graham and Patricia Whitfield to Lakeview Rural Holdings Pty Limited, registered in Queensland. Both our signatures. We had signed nothing. "She's done her homework," Patricia said. The signatures were good. Very good. I've spent 28 years reviewing rural property documentation. I knew what clean forgery looked like. My stomach turned over slowly. The way it does when you've confirmed the thing you were hoping you'd be wrong about. I did the arithmetic. 11:45. The Lands Registry office in Wodonga processed rural title transfers through their Melbourne Coordination Office, which ran a weekend emergency lodgement service until noon. 15 minutes. Patricia was already dialing. Not me, her. She called a woman named Beverly Oates, retired conveyancer, former colleague from a school committee. Beverly had done our property documentation when we refinanced in 2009 and had the specific combination of professional competence and personal stubbornness that makes someone useful in a genuine emergency. "Beverly," Patricia said when she picked up, "I need an emergency caveat on the Whitfield Road title. There's a fraudulent transfer sitting in the system and we have about 12 minutes. She paused. "Yes. We've just been pushed off a bank by our son's girlfriend." Can we do the paperwork first? Thank you. Beverly reached the duty registrar at 11:53. Emergency hold confirmed at 11:58. 2 minutes. I found out in the car park of the Yei District Memorial Hospital. Watching the automatic doors and feeling the adrenaline leave me the way floodwater leaves a paddock suddenly and completely, exposing everything it had been covering. Patricia was already inside. I sat in the Land Cruiser with cracked ribs and a wrist I still hadn't looked at properly. And I made my list the way I always made lists, when a problem needed structural thinking rather than reaction. Lakeview Rural Holdings, Pty Limited. Queensland registration. Start there. Cornerstone Land Solutions. Brisbane. Same envelope I'd seen the letterhead. Cross-reference. The Northern Slope. 43 acres. The messmate stand. Why would this be worth engineering a long-term fraud operation? And Callum. Somewhere between Melbourne and wherever Sophie had directed him. My son, 33 years old, and I was going to have to find out exactly how far in he was, regardless of what that answer looked like. Patricia had a grade 2 medial ligament sprain, a hairline fracture of the lateral tibial plateau, and a concussion she disputed with the attending doctor in a calm and structured way that I recognized as her using her teacher voice on someone half her age. I sat beside her bed in the emergency bay, asked the nurse for their Wi-Fi password, and went to work on my phone. By 5 the following morning, I had 4 pages of notes and the name of the person who had built all of this. Lakeview Rural Holdings, Pt Limited, registered in Queensland 18 months ago. Registered agent, Marcus Holt, solicitor, Brisbane. Cross-referenced against Cornerstone Land Solutions, same registration date, same address, same agent. I pulled Holt's professional history. Articled clerk in Mansfield, Victoria, in the early 90s. Specialized in rural estate disputes and easement law across northeast Victoria and southern New South Wales. And his maternal grandmother's maiden name, which I found in a 2004 death notice from the Mansfield Courier archived on a local history website at 3:17 in the morning. Fenwick. I put my phone down on the hospital blanket. Marcus Holt was Douglas Fenwick's great-nephew. He had spent the better part of a decade building a legal and financial structure to recover land his great-great-uncle had fraudulently sold in 1968. Not for principle. Not for justice. A rural land aggregator had commissioned a geological and ecological survey of the Yei Valley corridor 14 months ago, the same month Cornerstone formed. The same month Lakeview was registered, identifying a section of the northern Whitfield road slope as containing a significant aquifer, with commercial water license potential assessed between $12 and $38 million in the current market. Water rights in a drying climate. Of course, $12 to $38 million. Under the messmate trees, under the cottage, under Patricia's buried tin box, on land my father bought for $3,800 from a man who didn't have the legal right to sell all of it. I looked at my wife asleep across the room, bandaged, monitored, completely still in the way only people who have run entirely out of energy go still, and felt something click into place in my chest, clean and certain, the way a property boundary marker feels underfoot when you've been walking in rough country and suddenly hit something solid. "All right, Marcus," I said quietly. "Let's see what holds." Patricia was discharged the following afternoon. The treating doctor gave her a discharge summary with instructions that she read carefully and then set aside with the serene efficiency of a person who has already decided on a different plan. In the car, she read my notes twice, looked out at the Maroondah Highway for a while. Then she said, "He's been planning this for at least 3 years. At least. He needed someone inside the house. He needed Callum." She went quiet in the way that meant she was organizing something rather than feeling it. "How do you want to handle our son? I want to know how far in he is before I decide anything else." The hire car was back in our driveway. They'd come back, which told me they still believed the transfer was in the system, that we were either dead or too injured to have done anything, and that the property was effectively already theirs. That kind of confidence is an asset when you know how to use it. I did not knock on the door of my own house. Callum was in the kitchen. He looked up when I walked in, and the color went out of him in one clean movement, like a light being switched off. He put down his mug. He sat down without being asked. He looked 19 again. The boy who'd reversed my ute into the machinery shed door in 2009 and stood in exactly this kitchen, with exactly this expression. Except this wasn't a bent bumper bar. "Where is she?" I asked. His eyes moved toward the hallway before he could stop them. Patricia's voice from the doorway behind me. Quiet. The classroom voice, the one that had managed Year 9 English for 3 decades. "Callum, did you know she wasn't Sophie before they approached you? Or after?" His jaw worked. "After. Just after." He said it to the kitchen table. Patricia nodded. "Tell us." From the beginning, Marcus Holt had contacted Callum 14 months ago, presented as a rural property solicitor with a title issue to disclose, said there was a historical documentation problem with the Whitfield Road land, that a legal challenge was probable, but that if the current owners cooperated with a negotiated transfer, the family would receive a settlement before any court process. $240,000. That was the number my son had exchanged his integrity for. A number that sounded meaningful to a 33-year-old project manager and was nothing, absolutely nothing, against what the land was actually worth. "He said nobody would get hurt," Callum said. "He said you'd never need to know the real reason. It would look like a voluntary sale. He said the legal challenge would win anyway, so it was better for everyone if he stopped. And the woman," Patricia said. Callum's hands tightened around the mug. "Sophie, the real Sophie. She came up on a mutual friend's Instagram. Holt's people found her. When they needed someone to go inside, they found someone who looked similar enough. He said she was a professional. He said she'd just be gathering information. Looking for documents. That's all. You brought a stranger into our home for 14 months, I said. You sat at our dinner table. You watched your mother, and I trust her." He put his face in his hands. "I know." I looked at my son for a long moment. 33 years of him. The boy who'd cried when the dog before Ned died. The teenager who'd driven 4 hours to be at his grandmother's bedside. The man who was now sitting in his parents' kitchen, having helped arrange for them to be pushed off a bank on a Sunday morning. None of those things canceled the others. But none of the others canceled this. "What's her real name?" I asked. Holt called her Dana. "I don't know her surname." I stood up. "You stay in this kitchen. You don't touch your phone." I looked at him. "We are not finished, but I have something to do first." I walked down the hallway. Did not knock. She was awake, dressed, bag packed, standing near the window, the way a person stands when they've already identified the exit routes. Her face arranged itself when I walked in confusion, relief, concern, the whole convincing sequence. "Graham, you're okay. We were so worried. We drove to the hospital, but they said, 'Her name is Dana,'" I said. And the performance dropped. Not slowly, immediately, like a screen going dark. The professional neutral underneath was actually almost impressive. This was someone who had done this before. "Here's what's happened while you were packing," I said. "Victoria Police have a formal statement from both of us regarding the incident at the back boundary yesterday. The statement includes your description, your vehicle registration, and Callum's account of your involvement." I looked at her calmly. "A caveat is registered against the Whitfield Road title as of 11:58 yesterday morning. The transfer never went through. Lakeview Rural Holdings has been referred to the Queensland Law Society for the conduct of its registered solicitor. And I have a call scheduled with a senior investigator from the Victoria Police Economic Crime Command at 9 o'clock this morning regarding the fraudulent execution of a property transfer instrument. She sat down on the edge of the bed. The front boundary of this property has a trail camera that covers the driveway and the main gate approach, I said. It's been there for 3 years. Yesterday morning's footage exists. She said nothing. I stepped aside from the doorway. Kitchen. Sit with my son and wait for the police. I'd recommend calling a solicitor of your own. A real one. Marcus Holt was arrested 6 weeks later. Fraud. Conspiracy to defraud. Fabrication of a transfer instrument. And when the Victoria police investigators began looking at the history of how Cornerstone had acquired information about rural landowners in the corridor, a secondary investigation into possible obtaining financial advantage by deception, going back 4 years and involving 3 other properties in the Northeast Victoria region, the aquifer assessment was confirmed. Commercial water license potential revised upward. The figure the assessors ultimately put in writing was closer to $26 million. Patricia's buried documents went to a property law specialist at Melbourne University who had, coincidentally, written her master's thesis on historical rural title defects in post-war Victoria. The statutory declaration from Raymond Fenwick's estate solicitor was dated 1961, witnessed, registered in Mansfield, and completely intact. 33 years in a tin box, under a timber cottage floor in a climate Patricia had described as cold and dry and honest, and every word was legible. The legal mechanism that followed is technical enough that I will spare you most of it. The short version: Raymond Fenwick died without direct heirs, but Patricia had been named in his informal written request as custodian of the documents, and the statutory declaration referenced an intent to seek rectification. After 6 months and a barrister who charged accordingly, a settlement was reached. I will not tell you the figure. It had 7 digits. Comfortably, Patricia cried when she signed the settlement documents. I did not cry. I sat at the kitchen table looking out at the northern slope, the messmate trees standing in the afternoon light the way they have stood since before anyone put a fence line through this country and thought about Raymond. Fenwick coming to a schoolyard in 1991 with a folder of documents, and no one left to trust. Thought about a 28-year-old teacher on yard duty who said, "Yes, I'll keep this safe," and then kept it safe for 33 years through every reason to let it go. Justice is a slow mechanism. It grinds so quietly that most people stop believing it's moving. And then, sometimes, it arrives. Dana, her full name, established through the investigation as Dana Pierce, former paralegal from Toowoomba, with a prior finding of dishonest conduct before the Queensland Law Society, cooperated with police and gave evidence against Holt. She received a good behavior bond and community service. Her evidence was substantial. Holt went to trial. I gave evidence over 2 days. I wore the same jacket I'd worn to Callum's university graduation. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A 62-year-old retired agricultural consultant from Yea, who'd been pushed off his own creek bank and was professionally displeased about it. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty on the primary counts. I watched Holt's face when the foreman spoke, the expression of a man who had constructed a careful, layered, years-long structure and genuinely could not understand why it had failed to hold. I could have explained it to him. In 28 years of consulting on rural properties, I learned that the structures that fail are always the ones built on a flaw in the foundation. You can engineer around the flaw for years. Eventually, the load finds it. Callum cooperated fully, gave everything he had to the investigators, flew to Yea and sat at our kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in June and said everything that needed to be said. Patricia and I said everything back. The conversation lasted 4 hours, and covered ground that had nothing to do with land fraud and everything to do with who we were to each other and what that meant going forward. Most of it is ours and stays that way. No criminal charges, cooperating witness, supervised undertaking, community service, 12 months of counseling he'd needed, frankly, since his mid-20s. He moved to a smaller flat in Fitzroy, goes to his sessions, calls on Sunday evenings. Sometimes I pick up on the second ring. Sometimes it takes a few more. Patricia answers every time. First ring. No hesitation. She's always been the more complete person in this marriage. I just didn't understand the full extent of it until I watched her direct our exit from a 3-meter creek bank on a fractured tibial plateau with the calm of someone finally setting down something they'd been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing the weight. We demolished the old equipment lean-to in July, and beneath it, the tin deed box Roy Whitfield's name, pressed into the lid in the stamp he'd used on every property document, from 1968 until he died, was exactly where Patricia had put it, 33 years before, perfectly preserved, the statutory declaration in Raymond Fenwick's solicitor's handwriting. Every word, intact. A brief covering letter from Raymond himself, written in the careful hand of a man who had not had much education, but had held on to his one piece of evidence for 30 years because he didn't know what else to do with hope. He wrote that he didn't expect anyone to fix it. He wrote that he was tired. He wrote that he'd chosen a teacher because he thought teachers understood that some things took a long time to come right. He wrote that he believed in patience. Patricia held the letter for a long time before she handed it to the barrister. "What does it say?" I asked. She told me. Then she folded it carefully and said, "He deserved better than what he got. I know, but he got something. Thanks to you." She handed the letter over. "He really did," she said quietly. "We walk the back boundary every autumn now. Just the two of us and Ned. Same 4 kilometers. Same fence posts. Same creek. Same messmate trees on the northern slope standing in the morning light like they have always stood and will stand long after. All of this is a paragraph in a local history nobody reads. We stop at the bank, where the creek bed drops away. Stand there for a while. Don't say much about it. We don't need to. The boundary is still there. So are we. That's the thing about honest ground it holds, even when everything built on top of it fails. And that, in the end, is the only thing worth building on. If this story stayed with you, here's what I hope you take from it. The people we love most are sometimes the people who carry things alone because they believe the weight belongs only to them. Ask the questions gently. Create the space. Secrets kept out of protection can become the very thing that puts everyone at risk. Check in on the ones beside you, not because you suspect them of anything, but because carrying something alone for 30 years is too long. And most people will set it down if someone simply makes it safe to do so. And if you're sitting with a difficult truth right now, wondering whether the moment will ever be right, sometimes the right moment is simply the next one. You don't have to wait for the creek bank. Thank you for being part of American Home Voices. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is about what happens when ordinary people face the moments they never saw coming and find out what they're actually made of. We'll see you in the next one.